Han van Gorsel. I'm the author of a new book, Pioneers and Milestones of Indonesian Geology, and one of the main characters in it is Professor Jozef Zwierzycki. I also have a rather large collection of his publications and maps of his time in Indonesia from 1914 to 1938, and I'd like to show you some examples at my house. So please follow me and see you there. Hello, thank you for coming to my office. I would like to take a few minutes to take you through the impact of Polish geologist Jozef Zwierzycki on the geology of Indonesia between 1914 and 1938, when it was still called the Netherlands Indies. So young Zwierzycki arrived in Batavia shortly after he obtained his doctorate in geology in Berlin in 1914 and joined the Dienst van het Mijnwezen, which is also called the Bureau of Mines or the Geological Survey, as a temporary geologist, which was common for non-Dutch geologists at that organization. After he spent 10 long years working and living in remote locations, Bandung became his home base in 1924. When he left Bandung in 1938, he'd been the head of the Geological Survey for 3 years. And this was the first non-Dutch geologist in that position. Zwierzycki's work in the first half of his career were mainly in geological mapping, and the second half he was more working as a hands-on supervisor and as a manager. So Zwierzycki made numerous contributions to the geology of Indonesia. In my bibliography of Indonesian geology, he's listed about 40 times as, principal author or as co-author. He was primarily a regional geologist, sort of in the style of Rogier Verbeek and Rein van Bemmelen. He clearly possessed the keen interest and also the physical and mental endurance that was required to survive in jungle field work and stay healthy during all that time, which was not what would usually happen. I would like to briefly show you some of the products that Zwierzycki produced, mainly maps, geological maps. But before we do this, I'd like to show you the format of publications at that time, and that most of Zwierzycki's work has been recorded in. So this is the Jaarboek van het Mijnwezen. This was published by the Bureau of Mines from 1870 till 1939. And every year we had one or multiple volumes of this with reports. And in many years this was accompanied by an atlas of maps and sections and schemes and what have you. And this set of books is the main vehicle in which everything is recorded in pre-independence Indonesia. So let's go and see what we can see in terms of maps. So please follow me through my office, where, as you can see, I've hung up a bunch of maps on the main projects that Zwierzycki has worked on. This was his first project from 1914 to 1919, and it shows a geologic map of Aceh in North Sumatra. On the right, the main purpose of this mapping project was to map the tertiary basins along the coast and the anticlines and synclines and oil and gas seeps, all mostly for petroleum geological interests. These maps are absolutely brilliant maps. You can see there is a lot of detail on all of them, and it's oil and gas seeps and other geological information that is still very useful today. There are no maps at this scale and detail still now 100 years later. Maps always come with nice cross sections. Also something that is not quite done in a lot of detail today. So this was the Aceh project. When this was over, Zwierzycki moved to a New Guinea project. This project had gone for a few years already, and several of their leaders had to leave because of health reasons. Zwierzycki came in for the last 2 years and managed to finalize it. Now you see there's a whole set of maps here, 1 to 100,000 scale on the floor. And this is published in the early 1920s. And it is the geology of the north coast of Netherlands, New Guinea, by compiled by Mr. Zwierzycki. As you can see, these maps again contain a lot of detail, which is still unlike anything ever published afterwards. And even though now these maps again are 100 years old, they're still very useful. They go from the Mamberano Delta to the border with Papua New Guinea. In the top right is the area of Hollandia and Sentani Lake and the Cyclops Mountains, where they're clearly no longer in tertiary basins. This area has all the elements of petroleum geologic interest, oil and gas seeps, but somehow none of the oil companies have ever shown much of an interest in this. So let's move to some bigger scale things here. Here is in between mapping projects and report writing. Zwierzycki was a master of compiling larger scale maps of the Indonesian archipelago here at 1 million scale, compiled by Dr. Zwierzycki. And so these, in addition to the Sumatra maps that I've shown you here, there are several maps of New Guinea, lots of white spaces, meaning no information at that time. This is the bird's head, and made by Dr. Zwierzycki. In 1924, Zwierzycki was no longer permanently living in the field area, but he was transferred to the head office in Bandung. They got a request for somebody to go to Sumatra, to the Jambi Barisan Mountains, and collect a bunch of early Permian plants. And Zwierzycki and Posthumus went there for 4 months with lots of logistical difficulties, but collected 1,900 plant fossils, early Permian, Cartesian, meaning Chinese type plants, and not Gondwanan, or i.e. Australian. So these faunas are very, floras, they're very important for paleogeographic reconstructions. But just look at the detail of the documentation of where samples were collected, and something that you don't see on any maps that are more recent today. There's also evidence for there being two totally different tectonostratigraphic terrains and major thrust faults in Sumatra. Still an issue for which there's a lot of good information collected by Zwierzycki, but it's still open for a lot of debate. Another kind of a neat product that Zwierzycki compiled in 1929 was the geotectonic map of the Netherlands East Indies of 1 to 5 million scale. And it shows sort of the main tectonic elements in Indonesia, from the modern arc, the the outer Arctic islands, sort of belts of Mesozoic granites that carry from Malaysia to Bangka to West Kalimantan. A lot of these main patterns that were discovered already then are still valid. In 1927, the Geological Survey finally started with a systematic geologic mapping project, and Zwierzycki became head of the Sumatra mapping. And while he was at it and waiting for staff, he went ahead and produced the first two maps. They started in the south, so Teluk Betung and Kota Agung. And one of his underlings in the project was Van Bemmelen, who just came fresh out of school, but he learned the ropes from Zwierzycki himself. So in the late 1920s and 1930s, Zwierzycki was more a manager, supervisor, but he did always try to go into the field wherever he could. Here he's showing, he's out, he's the second from the right, and he's out in the field in East Java with Rolf van Koningswald, paleontologist, on the right, and Ter Haar and Duifjes on the left. Here is the one of the official photos of Zwierzycki's department in 1934 in Bandung. You see him with his five European geologist staff and a large group of Indonesian support. It's an interesting photo. This is from left to right. It's Hetzel, Zwierzycki, Musper, Duifjes, and Koolhoven. After World War II, during World War II, three of these were died in internment, which it's a sad loss of lots of talent during a rough time. While Zwierzycki was head of the Geological Survey Department in 1935, 1936, there was a request for an expert opinion on the remaining gold reserves in the Rejang Lebong gold mine in Sumatra. Came from the Rejang Lebong Mining Company, which had been producing for 30 years or so, and now looked like it was exhausted. Zwierzycki thought that was a nice project for him to do, even though he was the boss. Spent some time in Sumatra and ended up with one of the best documentations of epithermal gold deposits in a fault zone. And he later used this as a habilitation thesis in Poland, which was required to become a professor at Wrocław University. So this is pretty much the overview that I have time for. So thank you for coming with me, and hope you enjoyed it. So, in conclusion, Jozef Zwierzycki proved to be a tough and productive geologist in the Geological Survey of Indonesia, the Netherlands Indies. His work was of very high standard, and much of it is still relevant today. Unfortunately, his name and work are not as well known in Indonesia today as they should be, but this is true for almost all pre-independence geologists, except perhaps Van Bemmelen because of his 1949 book. I'm glad to see that the Polish embassy has commissioned and published the book on Zwierzycki in cartoon format, and I have done my part of familiarizing the man by writing a chapter with two professors from the University of Wrocław, Alina Hrjastek and Anna Gorecka-Nowak. I probably mispronounced them all, which I am very sorry for. And this is also a chapter in the book that I just wrote and that will be published by ITB in the next few weeks. And in this book I discussed 238 of the most prominent pioneering geoscientists in Indonesia. And of course, Zwierzycki is in here. I have not attempted to do a ranking of the historic significance of these 238 pioneers, but if I had to, I would probably place Zwierzycki in the top 10 and perhaps even in the top 5 after, not far behind Verbeek and Van Bemmelen and Rutten. So, to end it all, in 1938, Zwierzycki left Bandung after he reached the mandatory retirement age of 50, and this would be the beginning of a second long career back in Poland until his death in 1961. But that's the beginning of a whole different story, and someone else knows much more about this. So thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this mini tour through my Zwierzycki collection in Houston, Texas. Thank you.